Needless to say, it has been a little over a year since the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. This was truly a moment that many of us believed would never happen. A woman's right to control her own body and make her own decisions seemed like a total given here in the United States. And yet this is no longer the case. Over the past year, almost 24 states have made abortion illegal or are considering it. We must, as women, strengthen our resolve to ensure abortion access for all women and to ensure that rights for women's equality are obtained and not lessened. So what can we do? I would like to have our panelists come up. I know the senator is here. Okay, everybody's here. Beautiful. Come up and we will sit and discuss this.
Elijah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Do this. Hold on. Okay. Hello? Nope. Hello? Hello? Oh, yes. Hello. Okay. So when we were preparing for our discussion, can you all see me? I don't want to have my backs to you. My grandmother would be very upset. When we were thinking about this conversation, we wanted to share the most important message we could for this moment. And being in New York, we have just passed the Shield Law, where women are coming together. To see how they can help women around the country. So we decided that that was something we would focus on. It's really my pleasure to welcome Andrea Salwin-Copel. She's the executive director of the National Council of Jewish Women here in New York. She's to my left. And also Julie F. Kay Esquire. She's the author of, you will see on your table, Controlling Women, What We Must Do Now to Save Reproductive Freedom, and co-founder and executive director of Abortion Coalition for Telemedicine, which you'll hear about. And of course, the Honorable Shelley Mayer. So please, a round of applause for our guests. So we were talking about exactly what we would be discussing today. So Andrea, we'll start with you. NCJW has made abortion access a #1 priority of its work, and the Pew studies have underscored that over 85% of Americans support legalized abortion in most cases. So talk to us a little bit to understand about abortion access and reproductive rights for women through a Jewish lens.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I'm so pleased to be here and really honored to be on this panel with Julie and Shelley and with you all today. It feels good to be in this room, in this time and addressing this important topic. I think in your opening remarks just now, you said over 80%, and I think you meant to say of Jewish Americans, yes, support access to abortion in all or most cases. I think everyone knows that Jews support abortion access, but we at NCJW, when we've made reproductive rights, reproductive justice, and abortion access part of our work for more than 50 years. I would say before Roe v. Wade, and in recent years we said to ourselves, what can we do at NCJW as a Jewish feminist organization? What can we do to increase and protect access to abortion, both here in New York and across the country, and both in the short term and the long term? And so we're focusing on really two aspects of this issue. In the short term, we're looking at what are the barriers to access here in New York City and state, because I think, as we all know, Roe was never enough. There were very real barriers for very large swaths of the population, even here in New York. So looking at that, even in the pre-Dobbs era, we decided to focus on the issue of so-called crisis pregnancy centers or fake clinics. So when I say that, I'm seeing some nodding. Does everybody, but I'm assuming everyone doesn't know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to spend just a couple minutes, giving you the briefing. Thank you. Here in New York State and across the country, we have an epidemic of fake abortion clinics. They're called crisis pregnancy centers. They are the front lines of the anti-abortion movement. These places exist solely to prevent women and girls from obtaining abortions, and they're very good at it. They pose as real reproductive health centers. There are more than 120 of them throughout New York State. That is, I think, double the number of actual comprehensive reproductive health clinics. They often set up shop next to or in the same building as legitimate clinics in the hopes that people will walk in by accident, and they do. So in 2018, NCJW New York launched what we call the Pro-Truth campaign. Its goal is to expose and fight the tactics of these fake abortion clinics. Our goal is to get the word out to populations that are targeted by these organizations, which are largely women and girls of color, immigrants living in low-income communities, people who typically don't have, the best access to comprehensive health care. So we're looking to inform those populations that these places exist. We have an interactive map telling them where they exist. We're distributing informational materials about, what we call how to spot a fake. You can all pick one of these up later. Working with a coalition, including, elected officials, including, Planned Parenthood of Greater New York, Abortion Access Front, and all of those coalition partners, and including, community organizing, and community-based organizations that have relationships, that have deep relationships with the target population of these places, to support them in informing their own communities. So in the long term, in this post-Dobbs era, we believe that the best path to winning back the right to abortion is to reclaim the narrative around religion and faith and abortion. And that is something that NCJW, as a Jewish feminist organization, is really well positioned to do. We want to reclaim that narrative and reframe it, to reframe abortion as a religious freedom issue. I think we've all seen and we've all heard, the laws, these horrible, bans, the 6-week ban, the 15-week ban, the different states, whatever one you want to look at, many of those legislators explicitly referred to their own religious faith in their motivation to pass these laws. They're not hiding that. That is part of sort of, the record, the legislative record of the passage of these laws. And so those laws are now being challenged, in court. I'm looking at Julie, our litigator. On the basis, it's an interesting turning of the tables. A lot of these challenges to those laws are using these sort of religious freedom laws on the books, laws that were passed to, for the purpose of, making sure that a baker didn't have to bake a cake for a gay wedding. Well, we can turn the tables on that and use those same religious freedom laws to say abortion bans violate my religious freedom.
Yep.
Yeah. So I am not a rabbi, I'm not a Torah scholar, but luckily, the Torah and the Talmud is very clear on this. For in Judaism and in the Jewish religion, abortion is healthcare. and the health and well-being of the pregnant person comes first. So, what we're trying to do, getting back to where we started, Stephanie, we know that Jewish Americans support access to abortion, but we want Jews to stand up in support of reproductive freedom and abortion access, not in spite of their religion, but because of it, as people of faith.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, and definitely something for us, to flip in terms of our perspective. Julie, you are what we call a change maker. You totally are. You are at the forefront of working on policy change around reproductive rights and abortion access for all. And I want you to talk a little bit about why you wrote your book, Controlling Women. And I also want you to talk about telemedicine and its way of supporting women around the country.
Thank you so much. And it's so lovely to be in this room with all of you, some of whom I've known forever and ever, and just in general to be in this community during such a difficult time. I think, I come to the abortion issue as a human rights issue, as a human rights attorney, and my human rights values are so informed by my Jewish upbringing in sort of what I call the free to be you and me Judaism of Boston in the 1970s, which really did focus on sort of, social justice values and human rights and how to make the world a better place. And I do think a lot of my background, both as a feminist and as an activist, comes from that framing. So this is a great space to be in. I want to sort of talk about the status of reproductive rights in America, grim. I think we all know that and have seen it. And we've seen post the Roe versus Wade ruling in Dobbs that overturned Roe, we've seen an exacerbation of inequalities that existed for a really long time in America around access to reproductive rights. And my co-author, Catherine Colbert, and I wrote Controlling Women, which is lovely table decor, and I thank Illuminate for providing that. It's the most me-centered table design since my bat mitzvah, I think. But I do encourage all of you to read it and to really learn the history of how we got here. That was the purpose of the book. And the other part of it going forward is, what do we do now? How do we look at control of women, of men, of gender, control of our bodies through the abortion debate? I often think the issue of abortion is really a stand-in for a larger kind of attempt to decide the human rights about whether, when, and with whom to have a child or not, and how to raise that family in safety and with security, with food and shelter and free from violence. And so I think what we're seeing, as Andrea said, even within the kind of courts and within the politics of abortion, it is very much part of a wider view of sort of stigmatizing and shaming individual women and making the decisions for them about their reproductive rights and their fundamental human rights. So that's the grim end of it. But I think what we've seen in this country and what we're continuing to see post-Dobbs is a real uprising and a real pushback from women, from men, from non-binary folks, from our allies who are saying, no, that we understand that this is a fundamental human rights issue. And that we are recognizing now this kind of accessibility gap around abortion now more than ever. And that we're recognizing that when you ban or restrict abortion, it hurts those most on the margins. So even before the Dobbs decision, we were seeing that abortion was out of reach for low-income folks, for people in rural areas, for people who had difficulties with immigration status, for teens, and disproportionately for folks of color who face structural racism and barriers to access in healthcare, which leads us not only to sort of difficulties in accessing abortion, contraception, but also a maternal mortality rate in this country that is really abysmal and needs to be seen as part of this whole reproductive freedom and access. So I want to talk a little bit about the Telemedicine Abortion Shield Act and the laws that New York is having, because I think it's one of the most sort of positive and tangible tools that we have developed post-Dobbs. I'm not allowed to praise Senator Shelley Mayer openly and publicly too much because she doesn't like it, but she has been an enormous I can't use the word hero. She was enormously effective in helping pass the SHIELD law in New York, and that has really allowed us to serve through telemedicine over 5,000 women and pregnant people in restricted or banned states each month, and that number is growing. So what is this miracle law? So telemedicine abortion shield laws are laws that 5 states have passed and implemented. California is next, but they provide protection from criminal and civil liability for licensed doctors and advanced care practitioners who provide reproductive health care services via telemedicine to patients located in states where abortion is banned or restricted. So that basically means that an abortion provider can be in New York State, can treat somebody through telemedicine and ship them abortion pills if indicated and if that's the person's choice, for about $150. And if somebody is in Alabama or Texas or you name your state, running from Georgia all the way through Texas, there's a real lack of access to abortion, even with these 6-week bans. And so what can happen is that the doctor or medical provider in the SHIELD state talks to or emails with or through telemedicine that we've all kind of become familiar with after COVID, sends the pills, the patient gets the medication within 3 to 5 days after the initial consult. These are the correct dosage, they are FDA certified, and they are, in consultation with a physician, and they can take these pills, mifepristone and misoprostol, wherever they want, in the privacy of their own home, at a friend's house, at a safe space, and in about 48 hours, they'll have completed their abortion at home. It sort of feels like a heavy period and maybe some flu-like symptoms. It's very safe. It's used globally, can be done sort of up through the first trimester, although there's more and more evidence that even later in pregnancy it can be effective. If there are questions or complications or they need follow-up care or reassurance, they can contact a licensed medical provider. They can get instructions and follow-up medications as needed. So it has been enormously effective. It's something that women are choosing. There is the option of travel in this country, and I think there's been a lot of emphasis on travel from banned states to safe states. My background was in Ireland when abortion was banned there, and during that time they had what was called the Irish solution to the Irish problem, which was a really lousy solution, meaning that women individually traveled abroad. There's a lot of shame and stigma in traveling. There's a lot of sort of subtle, like, you're doing something criminal or illegal, you're doing something you shouldn't be, and it's difficult and expensive. More than 50% of the women in this country who are having abortions already have one child, so there's child care arrangements, there's time off from work, from school, there's unexplained absences. So what telemedicine does is really give a choice to not travel. And I think that's something that we've seen more and more women are voting with their mice or their web. And it's important, I think, for us to support them with physician-informed or advanced care practitioner care at the level that we would all want for ourselves. I can talk more about sort of what we're seeing in the bigger picture as well, but I really think that part of what the Abortion Coalition for Telemedicine is trying to do is to pass these laws, which we thought would be the hard part, and it was, but implementation has been key as well, because abortion is treated differently and worse in this country by medical malpractice providers. There has been a heightened and exaggerated criminal threats from a lot of anti-abortion politicians trying to say that women can't travel, that you can't help somebody, you can't fund somebody, really trying to quiet and silence all of us who are allies, and trying to take away the support. And it's been quite effective in a lot of ways. And I think that's something that it takes a certain level of boldness to step up right now and to support abortion rights, whether through funding or through vocal support or through helping individual people. And I think this is that kind of room where people are stepping up and are doing the work that we need now more than ever. And that's probably a good place to turn over.
Yeah,
One such person.
and I would say boldness really describes the senator. When we were in our prep call, she said to me, "Please don't call me senator." But anytime I'm in a room with a senator, I have to call you senator. If you would talk about the history of the Shield Law in terms of why it was important for you and how you moved it through the process.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. You know, when we were invited to do this, it was before the Hamas situation. And then that happened. And I was like, really, we're going to talk about abortion policy? So now that we're in this room, I'm so appreciative of the opportunity to talk about many things that unite us as Jews, and this is one of them. And one of my incredible mentors and leaders as a Jewish elected official, I saw coming in, I don't think she saw me, Ruth Messenger, who deserves enormous credit for the many, many years of our past where we intersected, and her leadership as a principled Jewish elected official is one that, you know, many of us emulate. And the other person I do want to mention is my colleague, Senator Liz Kruger, who has been chair of the it was bipartisan, we don't have any Republicans on it anymore, in New York, pro-choice legislative group in the New York State legislature. But here's what really did happen. So after Dobbs was leaked, you know, because I am very fortunate to be part of a very diverse, strong Democratic supermajority in the Senate, we wanted to do everything we could immediately to ensure New York remained a safe place. But the focus was very much on people traveling, as Julie said, to New York, traveling, protecting the doctors or physicians or whoever gave abortion advice and provided procedures here to women from other states who traveled, protecting them for malpractice premiums or for other disciplinary action, protecting the person who maybe picked up someone at an airport and drove them here from some prosecution in another state. It was very focused on that, all of which was good. Also, we set up a fund and, you know, we did everything that was right to do. But I am a senator who represents about half of Westchester, but I come from Yonkers, and my assembly district has always been Yonkers, and before I became in the Senate. And I represent thousands of women who are poor, who have a kid, who find out they're pregnant, who are 17 or 18, and the last thing they could have done was find the time, place, or money to go to another state. When they found out they were pregnant, and this is something we all know, even in our own state, women who are poor, largely women of color, white women who are working and are poor, they do not have the resources to do any of this travel. They can't get childcare. They can't get their boyfriend or husband to watch the other kid. They can't afford the travel. They can't afford the procedure. And the whole thing is totally intimidating, by the way, as we all know. I was very focused on women are not going to travel here. Only the most privileged women who already sort of know how to do these things will be able to do so. But the thousands and thousands of women who simply have the bad fortune of living in these other states, that's all they have. It's not their fault that they have these terrible legislators and terrible governors who basically have denied their rights, as well as the Supreme Court. I was totally focused on these women. So at that time, Massachusetts had already passed a so-called Shield law that allowed, although it wasn't as strong as ours, it did allow Massachusetts licensed providers to engage in telemedicine with women in other states. So I wanted to do something like that. By the way, it was signed by a Republican governor, which was relevant because I could make the argument that if this person signed it, why couldn't we do it? But I did run into substantial obstacles across the board. The first one, which is just a little technical, is telemedicine is sort of a new thing, grew in COVID, but traditionally, although not by law, it's been seen to be regulated in the state where the patient lives, not where the provider is. So if you're doing telemedicine now to get a hearing aid or something by a doctor in California, that person generally had to also be licensed in New York State. And the rule was, and so people said, no, you can't do that. You can't have New York providers provide medication to a patient in Alabama because it's governed by the Alabama law, which prohibits them from getting this medication abortion. That was fight number one. We had Julie, and besides Julie, we had fantastic, courageous doctors who wanted to do this, who were absolutely determined. Give us the power to send these pills. That's what we need to do. That's what our oath is about, and that's what we're going to do. And so that was problem one, was the so-called law. Problem two was the choice community writ large was not entirely comfortable with this. They thought it would give false hope to doctors that they weren't going to be prosecuted in other states. And they don't want to do that. That's a legitimate concern. My view is all along, yes, it's complicated. Yes, we're going to get sued. And yes, it's new. And those are three good reasons why we should go ahead and do something, because we can't be stopped by something being complicated. Our fundamental right was taken away by a Supreme Court that didn't find it very complicated. Now it's our job to find a path out of this for as many women as possible. And as I was saying to Stephanie on the phone, it was for me personally very informed by my Judaism, in the sense that my focus was on the women that I knew that were not Jewish, that were in my world, for whom this forced pregnancy, which is what's going to happen if they did not have access, was a life-changing event. It wasn't just having the abortion. It was all those years that all of us who are parents know come afterwards, which are completely change your life forever. And we had an ethical obligation to do everything we could. And it took us about, how long, 10 months?
I think it was 10 years.
10 years in our hair, but 10 months of bringing everyone together, persuading people, having help of many legal experts, working with colleagues in other states, working with these fantastic, very knowledgeable, far more knowledgeable than I about some of the technical parts of the bill, to give protection in New York State for these particular providers who were willing to do it. Yes, they could not go to another state where abortion is prohibited. They will be arrested there. And they said, no, fine, we're not going there. We're going to do this here. And what happened is, I got this wonderful assemblywoman who is a nurse, Karina Reyes from the Bronx, to co-sponsor it. She got it past the second to last day of the session in the assembly. We were on pins and needles. And the governor signed it right away. And as soon as the governor signed it, I think the next week, these fantastic doctors started sending thousands of pills. The demand was so great to get these pills, which were safe and cheap. The big obstacle, the $150. The big obstacle for the women in these other states, affording $150, which exactly was to my point. These are people that in our Jewish tradition are our sisters. They are our partners. Our job as elected officials is to stand up for them, not those that have the most choices. And so I was very fortunate to be determined enough, with many good partners, fantastic leadership of Andrea Stewart Cousins, who was willing to pass this early on, knowing all these obstacles were going to happen, and a Governor Hochul who signed it right away. And so many great partners, including in the religious community, that came by, and all of the choice advocates who came on board. And ultimately, we passed the strongest, at the time, shield law in the country. But the real thing is 5,000 women a month are now getting these pills at a reasonable rate.
Wow. And Julie, you work so closely on this. You're such an advocate. Please just share a couple of your thoughts about working on this, and of course with the senator as well.
It did feel like 10 years, but it was fun too. And I think what Senator Maris said about having the doctors and healthcare providers committed was really important. And implementation has been tough. We passed this great law. We thought that was the hard part at the Abortion Coalition for Telemedicine. That sort of our focus is on both, giving medical providers the tool and safety. We know we're never going to get to zero risk for them. We live in America. There are abortion providers. They're aware of it, but we're minimizing their risks through creating a medical malpractice insurance pool, through developing a legal defense group. And then the third piece is really looking at funding. I think we were surprised at the just enormous number of people who wanted to do telemedicine. And we're talking about, our focus is really on the banned or restricted states. It is sort of simpler and maybe less complicated to do telemedicine abortion in a abortion-friendly state within New York State, or from New York State to another blue state, those kinds of things. But we're really focused on the most marginalized communities, the ones who are most the target of criminal justice system and the inherent racism of our system, and following this model of how do we help fund people. That's kind of our next great piece of it.
So to that point, we have a question on how can we help those out-of-state women to gain access? How can we help defer the $150? What can we do?
Well, is that a plant? So we at ACT, we are in the process of developing a fund that will provide the sort of $150, and we do want to keep that cost low. There's sort of a range of fees that providers charge, but we really want to keep it at that $150 and have a way of safely and legally reimbursing providers for that care. And I would also say just learning about and spreading the word about telemedicine. Even within the abortion rights community, it's a very new tool. The law passed in July. People don't understand it. That's kind of why I spend a lot of time going through what it actually looks like, because people are sort of like, how did they get the pills through the screen and things? But it is a very straightforward one. And look, we have elections coming up. There's an election in Ohio literally on the ballot about abortion, but what we've seen is that abortion is an issue in every single election, state, federal, local, everywhere. And so engaging politically and supporting change makers will have not just a ripple effect, but a nail on the head effect.
So I'll just use this question as something I wanted to discuss briefly. Talk about the criminal penalties for taking a pregnant person out of state for an abortion. Example, Idaho mother and son just arrested for doing that. What do we do about that if we want to be of help and people want to put themselves forward like that?
Well, first thing, I to Julie's point, this is really a lot about politics. I hate to be so blunt, but these state legislators in these states, frequently, if you poll the general public in that state, they do not support these criminalizing bans. Because my experience in a district that traditionally was somewhat conservative is even across the board, women and most men feel extremely strongly about this and do not support these policies. But the gerrymandering of state legislative districts allows these kinds of laws to be passed in these other states. So I see it a little bit in a political lens. But what can we do? I mean, I think, ACT and other groups are trying to create financial mechanisms to help people get access to the pills so they don't have to travel. I mean, that's one of the big benefits of telemedicine. You engage with the person over the screen. The person says, you verify you're pregnant. They give you the appropriate clinical advice, and then they put them in the mail.
Yeah.
And nobody has to know.
Yeah, and I think the other point to emphasize around telemedicine is that, except for in 2 states, it is not a crime to self-induce an abortion. So it's not the person, the woman herself, who is going to be at risk any more than they were during Roe. And we already saw these kinds of rogue prosecutors. They're less rogue, they're more chest thumping now. They're trying to silence and intimidate women and anybody who will help them. So I think part of it is pushing back, is recognizing that one of the reasons why there has been such an attack on mifepristone, which is the first medication in abortion medication, is because they can't stop us. And we've seen that globally. This is not your mother's pre-Roe or your grandmother's or your own pre-Roe pro situation where women were risking their lives and their fertility to have abortions. This is it. We're in a different world now, and we want to make sure part of what ACT is trying to do is normalize and destigmatize telemedicine. And the clock is running on it because we don't know what's going to happen with mifepristone, but moreover, we don't know sort of where we're going in this country with abortion rights generally. And so, the more we get the word out, the more this becomes a regular practice, the harder it is to put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, for sure. So before we get to your closing thoughts, Andrea, someone just dropped it. Okay, question. Well, thank you. The idea of what you brought up initially, which was this case against my religion, when are we going to be able to use that as we vote in terms of lawmakers and making them aware of this? Is there an avenue where we can get in there and talk about this? Because that makes a lot of sense to a lot of people here in this room.
I think that we have to look at this as a long game and as culture change. I started my career 30 years ago in the early 90s at Planned Parenthood Federation of America. If you had told me then, that the situation now, all these years later, for abortion access across our country would be worse and not better, well, I'm not sure if that would made it easier or harder to get out of bed in those days. But we have ceded this ground to those who oppose abortion. We have allowed them to claim, that they have religion and and God and all people of faith on their side. They've been doing that for 50 plus years. So I do think this is a long game. I do think this is a long game around educating ourselves, even as Jews, that our religion firmly supports access to abortion, educating in an interfaith way. It's not just Judaism, other religions as well support access to abortion. This is a long game of culture change to raise up and change that narrative. In the meantime, I think where this is playing out the most is in the courts and those religious freedom challenges to these laws. And I think that's a very, very promising strategy. That's happening at the state level. And I think I will leave it, to others, the Center for Reproductive Rights and other organizations like that to really try. We need to, I think, coordinate those litigation efforts and, maybe take a page from the playbook of the anti-choice side and make sure that those cases are being really strategically placed. In certain jurisdictions. But I think that's where we see this playing out in terms of policy right now. But I think, we're looking at, what we call this movement, Jews for Repro, Jews for Abortion Access at NCJW. We're really looking at that as the long game. And it is about speaking out. What we're doing is we're engaging synagogues, congregations, and especially engaging Jewish clergy, rabbis and other Jewish clergy in being a visible voice, an audible voice and a visible presence on this issue. I belong to a very, liberal reform congregation, but earlier this year when, at NCJW's urging, when Brooklyn Heights Synagogue held its first Repro Shabbat, our rabbi said the word abortion, 20 times from the pulpit. I had never seen that happen before. I think there's this tacit understanding, Jews support abortion, but I think being vocal about that, being outspoken, but I think, Stephanie, I don't know if this is the answer you wanted, but I think it's a long game.
It's a long game. We've heard that before. Someone asked the question, if we have friends who are in no-access states, information, a website, where can people go? Where can we direct them?
Well, first of all, I think talk to your friends is always the best thing before you send them to a website. But I would be remiss if I didn't say the Abortion Coalition for Telemedicine. We're at theactgroup.org. I think everybody has to find a way to get involved. And that's sort of where we started with your remarks, Stephanie, sort of, we don't have to fix this, but we can do something and we should. And so I think looking at your local community, I'll say my kind of concluding remarks too. Sure. This is a human rights issue. It's a civil rights issue. In America, anything that has to do with rights has great inequalities for people who are in minority groups or on the margins. And so I think it fits squarely with sort of our mission of those in the room to make change. It is a long game. It took them 50 years to eradicate Roe. They started with women in poverty with the Hyde Amendment and moved on from there. I think similarly, I don't want it to take 50 years. It can't. I can't. But I think what we can do today is support people directly with access to abortion, whether it's through telemedicine or travel, to have those choices available to people, and in the medium term to really look at our politics and who we're electing. In the long term, my sort of big goal out there is to amend the Constitution to protect gender, using a human rights model to promote gender equity. Our founding fathers did not do such a great job on race and gender equity, but we can change that. And look, I'm less optimistic about the courts will save us. I think I kind of lost faith even before Dobbs, but I do think ultimately if we can change the Constitution, we can change what the courts are doing. But that's a long game of at least 10 to 20 years, and it starts by building state power and by helping those who today need access to abortion and don't want to travel and can't wait.
Yeah. One moment. Ruth, did you want to mention 2 documentaries?
Some people may have seen these, but there are 2 documentaries that are related to this that you can get, that you can show in your group. So one that tracks the issue that Andrea was just talking about, and Julie, is called Under God. And it's very clear about the Jewish position on abortion, and it features a woman whose name I can't remember, who's a law professor at Penn, who is planning to take this to the courts on precisely that basis as soon as she gets the right case. The other one, which is just for, fun and love and whatever, the Jules have all heard me talk about this, but since Shelley said such nice things, you should all know that New York was the second state to adopt right to choice before Roe. And we adopted it on one vote because one member of the state assembly gave up his political career after 10 years in office. Instead, he would lose his next election, and he did. He's Jewish. His son is a rabbi now. That his son was not a rabbi when he did this, but he cast the deciding vote, and it was a great example of legislative moral courage, like the state senate.
Thank you.
And
The second one is called The Deciding Vote,
Plan.
and I believe it's on the New Yorker
The Plan C
Film
movie.
And I think then it becomes available on YouTube.
thank you. Thank you. I also want you to know that these books that are on the table are for you. So just know that, and you can get a signature during lunch. I'm just saying that. Sorry, I didn't clear that, but I'm just saying that. And ask questions. Yeah. Oh, we're not done. Go ahead.
I just want to mention that Plan C, which was the beginning of the conversation of really pushing medication abortion, which was how I got into it. There's a new film about their efforts that is now out and is going to be available, I think, streaming soon, shortly. We'll get the name around. Anyway, I just.
Perfect.
Oh, it's called Plan C. That.
In all caps.
Okay. All right.
Perfect. And just because I've been given the okay for a couple of extra minutes, this is a really interesting question that came in, and I want you to address it. How do we doulas and midwives support reproductive freedom? I think that's a really special conversation when you think about it. Any thoughts on that?
Let me just jump in to say that one of the benefits of having a woman leader of your conference in the Senate and having so many women, young women, that get elected, shout out for people under the age of 30 who want to run, is that these conversations are happening in the legislature. We are doing a great deal to protect doulas and hopefully to get them appropriate reimbursement under most insurance and Medicaid. Same with to protect midwives as much as possible. There's obviously tension between these groups and some of the established medical community. But we are working both on protecting doulas and midwives and encouraging them as much as possible as both affordable and, for many women, desirable ways to give birth and to deal with birth-related issues.
I love that question because it's sort of like, how does the New York Yankees engage us all in sports? I mean, the doulas, midwives are part of bringing reproductive freedom. They're a much more responsive and individualized model. They help with maternal mortality rates. In New York State, the maternal mortality rate is horrific, and it's 4 times as bad for Black women. So what the senator was talking about the reimbursement rates, making sure that women on Medicaid have the choice of having doulas and midwives and kind of the top tier care that we would all want and that we're all deserving of, despite what the medical system in this country may tell us. So I think that kind of conversation, also, in New York and Massachusetts and other Shield states, advanced care practitioners and midwives can do telemedicine abortions. So
Great.
you're very welcome.
So yes, please.
And I have another thought on this question, and I'm not sure if it gets at the answer that was being sought, but I think that there's a lot of education that our policymakers need about the full spectrum of experiences of pregnant people. I think that, like the earlier panel, pregnancy and birth and abortion is complicated. It's not simple. And I think the enactment of these bans is starting to give people a clue about the spectrum of situations that pregnant people deal with. It's not a dichotomy or a binary between people who have wanted pregnancies and carry them to term and give birth to wanted children, and people who have unwanted pregnancies and get abortions. There is really a very permeable kind of membrane, and it's a continuum, in the breadth of and complexity of experiences that women have, around pregnancy and childbirth. And when you have these panels of mostly men, making these laws, and when you have the silence and stigma around pregnancy loss, and the shame and silence and misunderstanding around pregnancy loss, which is something we know a lot about at NCJW New York. We have a pregnancy loss support program for people who've experienced that, and so we know those parents, we know those people. So I think that doulas and midwives, along with everyone in the medical community, and people, and a lot of this is about women themselves telling their stories of pregnancy, abortion, birth, so that our policymakers across the board can better understand the complexities of these issues.
Absolutely. Senator, final thoughts before we
I just want to say one thing, that next year on the New York State ballot, not this November, but next November, will be the new ERA. And the ERA, as we fought to get done after Dobbs, will enshrine in the New York State Constitution the right to abortion. And it's intentionally not this year when fewer people vote. It's next year when there's a presidential election. So that is an incredibly important thing. We fought very hard to have the language post-Dobbs of the word sex that's protected expressly to include pregnancy-related and termination of pregnancy. These things are going to be explicit in the New York State Constitution. So we don't have to worry as much about some other legislature and some other governor and some other things and a court misinterpreting what our statute meant, because it'll be in the state constitution. So that's point one. And point two is, I think it is so important to the point you raised about sort of our Jewish values and speaking up I'm not sure I have total comfort as an elected official about using my faith in that context. But they have stolen these issues of principle and faith as they stole a lot of other issues. And we have to reclaim them back as ours. Just like patriotism belongs to people who may disagree with the American government or may disagree with another. These are bedrock principles of our democracy, including women having autonomy over whether they are going to have children. And we can't give it to them, and we also can't minimize it. And I think one thing we learned after Dobbs is this impacts every woman, including those that disagreed with the concept. The word choice made them uncomfortable. And I was never a big fan of it. Now we have so many people on our side. We need to take advantage of the momentum and the fact we are on the right side of history, and the court got this wrong, and then translate that into policy that really benefits women. So I think we have a great deal of opportunity. We have to make lemonade out of the lemons the Supreme Court gave us, but we have the public will on our side now. We just have to use it correctly and get to the right result.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Any other thoughts?
Just thank you. And I think to be in this space and to have this conversation go forward, it's not my son's bar mitzvah, but it's still, I think, so important to so many of us and our family values and what we believe in as humans and Jews and allies.
True, true. Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking. Wow.